Article 110. Article 110 has had a massive overhaul, a big reorganization. And what happens is when you develop standards, and this goes through all the different standards, not just NFPA 70E, that as standards are developed, they evolve to where you have pieces all over the place. And so like there's a discussion about this over here, but also there's something over here. It's just how they evolve. And so every now and then you take a step back and it's like, no, we need to actually pull all these things into the same location. And so with Article 110, that's actually what happened. In fact, within NFPA 70E, I look at it, there's a lot of great material in there. But I look at NFPA 70E, the key articles are just Articles 110, 120, and 130. Yes, there's more beyond that. There's Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 and so forth. But those are the big three, 110, 120, and 130. And so 110 are for the general requirements. And there were some requirements in 120 for lockout, tagout, and the electrically safe work condition. And in 130 for working around the electrical hazards, there were actually, they belonged in 110, the general requirements. So as part of this reorganization, so to speak, what happened is we have the original sections that are on the left. We have 110.1 through 110.7, and that's what we had. Well, with the 2021 edition, we still have these same sections. But now they're from 110.5 up through 110.11. So they have different numbers. And so you may be thinking, oh, so what about 110.1 through 110.4? What's going to fill that space in? Well, it's information from other parts of 70E that have been relocated. For example, 110.1, the first section, the most important is priority, which I'm going to discuss. 110.2, general requirements, that came in from Article 120. 110.3, that moved in from Article 130. And you could see what happened here. So there were certain language and subsections from other parts of NFPA 70E that were better suited for Article 110. And then also down at the bottom, there's a new section in here. It's 110.12, and it's for equipment use. And we'll take a look at this. To begin with, I want to talk about priority. So priority, this was introduced in the 2018 edition of NFPA 70E. And again, I consulted my dictionary, and it said that priority, it's a fact or condition of being regarded or treated as more important. And so this originated in section 105.4, and now it's been relocated to 110.1. So what is it about priority that is so important that it's going to be 110.1, the very first text that you're going to find in 110? Well, the priority. This goes back to the question that I asked you when we got started. What's the single most important aspect of electrical safety? Eliminating the hazard. And so because of that, this is the priority, the single most important priority throughout all this. Eliminate the hazard, so much so that it was moved to 110.1, the first thing that you're going to see. And there's also an informational note that references that hazard elimination is top on the hierarchy of risk control methods. It's at the top. And even NXF about risk assessment gives examples of hazard elimination. And elimination is number one for all of this. There was also an informational note that's new. Informational note number 2, discussing that the electrical safe work condition, again, it's a state. And it goes on to describe what that state is. But further down, it references Article 120 for the requirements to establish an electrically safe work condition. So really we're looking at two different things. We're looking at the state of the electrically safe work condition, and then we're looking at what are the requirements to actually establish the electrically safe work condition. There's a new informational note, and this informational note references a job safety planning checklist. Really important. You might think a checklist. I mean, weren't people already doing that? Well, hopefully it's a good idea, But checklists are incredibly important. Now, let me explain why checklists are so important. Years ago, I used to fly. I actually flew a Cessna 172. And when you're a pilot, you learn the importance of pre-flight checklists, because it's better to be out there checking your flaps, your aileron, your carb heat, even though you're burning expensive aviation fuel and putting time on the engine. It's better to go through all that, because you learn the importance of being able to catch a problem while the wheels are still touching the ground. Because once the wheels leave the ground, it's a whole different thing. Now you have to contend with the effects of gravity, and that could be a problem. And so the same kind of thing holds true when it comes to electrical safety. Checklists are very, very helpful, because it's much better to go through the checklist and maybe catch a problem or realize you need to rethink something than to wait until there actually is trouble and you're trying to figure things out very quickly. So a checklist is a really great way to do this. So checklists are now an official part of this. 110.3, the electrically safe work conditions. Some of this information was relocated to 110. And it's not the procedure for establishing the electrically safe work condition, but it's information about the electrically safe work condition when it's required. And it's required if an employee is going to be working within the limited approach boundary and there are exposed parts, and if the employee interacts with the equipment where conductors or circuit parts are not exposed, but there's an increased likelihood of injury from an exposure to an arc flash hazard. So this second item, this was first introduced in 2009, the 2009 edition of NFPA 70. And I remember when this was introduced, because everybody just referred to it as one word, interaction. Like, what does that mean? And there was a lot of confusion. Like, is just operating a circuit breaker, is that interaction? Is that an arc flash hazard? And it wasn't really clearly defined. 2012 tried to clean it up a little bit. 2015 was the first time you started to see certain types of activities, operating a circuit breaker or a switch, doors closed or so forth. And then you also saw what is considered normal operation. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, because there was an addition to that table about when an arc flash hazard may exist. And it has to do with the interaction side of this. And so the interaction, number two, that's also equally important. And what I wanted to emphasize is this references when the electrically safe work condition is necessary, not how you establish it. That's later on in NFPA 70E. The Electrical Safety Program. The correlating committee required that references to safety management systems and safety management standards be removed, and they're relocated to the annex, to an annex. And so 110.5A, this text was struck out because it's referencing the Occupational Health and Safety Management System. And also there's an informational note. Informational note 2 directly referenced an Occupational Health and Safety Management System, and that was removed. And so instead, there is a reference, an informational note, to Annex P. And Annex P is about aligning the implementation of this standard with occupational health and safety management systems. Human error. I think if we could attribute some of the electrical safety issues to one common denominator, I think this is it, human error. And so human error was added previously, but it was clarified a little bit this time around. And by clarification, what I mean is this states that the risk assessment procedure shall address the potential for human error and its negative consequences, and here's what needed clarifying, on people, processes, the work, environment, and equipment. That's a pretty broad statement. But actually remember, NFPA 70E, it's about electrical safety. So a little bit of extra text was added relative to the electrical hazards in the workplace. So this was revised a little bit to focus on the electrical hazards. Another new addition, the electrically safe work policy. It's a new subsection, And it just states that an electrical safety program shall include an electrically safe work condition policy that complies with 110.3. Now, this may seem maybe obvious, but now it's part of NFPA 70E, that if you develop an electrical safety program, that it has to have in there the electrically safe work condition policy. So this is a requirement. Now, again, emphasizing electrically safe, the electrically safe work condition. Additional training and retraining. A bit of a change here, just really an addition, that this used to just simply state retraining. Well, that kind of implied that you're retraining maybe what you already went through. But sometimes it's necessary to just have additional training. Maybe there's something new. It's not that you're retraining, there's additional training. And so those words were added, the additional training and retraining for this. Types of training. Oh, who could have foreseen this? So the types of training, 110.6A4, type of training, there's an informational note that was added. And this informational note says, classroom training can include interactive, electronic, or interactive web-based training components. So this was written before 2020, and it recognizes that electronic training is widely used. I mean, who could have imagined this particular year where people are staying at home, you're not able to get in front of large groups and so forth. And so I think this was a bit ahead of its time. And actually, speaking of being timely, I started the end of last year, our web developers, we actually began an online training platform last year. So the timing couldn't be any better. And so we rolled this out just a couple weeks ago. It's kind of a soft opening. And this program is being recorded. And so the recording will be available to all of you. You'll have access to it, and it'll be out here. Over the weekend, we're going to upload it. It'll be out. You'll receive an email notice about it, and you can go out and use it, review it, share it with your friends and colleagues and so forth. The host and contract employer's responsibility. This was relocated from 110.3 to 110.7, just part of that reorganization shuffle. And this has been around for a while, where the host employer has knowledge of hazards covered by the standard that are related to the contract employer's work. There shall be a documented meeting between the host employer and the contract employer. However, there was a new addition. And the new addition is an informational note. And it states that on multi-employer work sites, more than one employer can be responsible for identifying hazards, conditions, and creating safe work practices. What's this telling us? Simple. This is telling us safety, it's everybody's responsibility. And that's really what this informational note is all about. It's everybody's responsibility. Test instruments and equipment. So with test instruments and equipment, a minor change here, but it actually has, I think, some far-reaching ramifications. The text operating at voltages equal to or greater than 50 volts, that was replaced. And it was replaced with where the electrical hazard exists. And let me show you what this actually looks like, the full text. The reference to 50 volts was eliminated. The reason the reference to 50 volts was eliminated, that kind of implies that the only real issue is the shock hazard. And there's more than a shock hazard. In fact, somebody that I worked with years ago, this was back in the early 90s, he was performing voltage measurements, and it was on a 480 volt system. This facility that he was at was having some low voltage problems. So he was out conducting 480 volt measurements to see what they have. And one of the places that he performed the measurements was at a dry type transformer. He actually took the cover off the dry type transformer, which is certainly not a good idea. And he goes in to measure the 480 volts, see the nominal 480, to see what they actually had. And what he failed to recognize, 480 volts was the secondary side. And he tangled with the primary, which was 4,160 volts. Shock hazard wasn't his only problem. It was a massive arc flash. And due to the burn injury that he sustained from the arc flash, not just the shock that was there, performing voltage measurements, he died. It was about a week later. So yeah, this is to emphasize or put a greater emphasis that there's more than just the shock hazard. And so what the text looks like: only qualified persons shall perform tasks such as testing, troubleshooting, and voltage measuring on electrical equipment where an electrical hazard exists. We have a new section, 110.12, equipment use. Equipment shall be used in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. So my wife saw this. She sees me writing and reviewing a lot of this stuff. And she saw the equipment shall be used in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions and kind of chuckled. And she just shook her head and said, "Did they write that specifically for you?" And, it's like, what, me? I'm offended. And no, it's the typical thing. I'll be working on a home project and start running into trouble. And then, of course, she says, "Well, did you read the instructions?" No, the instructions are in the trash, or they're in the box. And so, yeah, so this is official. The equipment shall be used in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. And that is very important when it comes to electrical safety.